Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here, as you can see in the title, with the finale of my A to C project Pan. I was able to wrap this project up earlier in the year than I thought I would, which is very exciting. So I'm gonna jump into the shades that I still had left in this project at last month. But before I do so, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. But let's jump into the video. So like I said, I had 3 shades left at the last update, so I'm going to go through them first. The first shade comes from my Sultry palette, and I had a shade Cyborg, which is this beautiful silver shade. At the last update I had used this 7 times, and it actually only took me one more use to pan on it, and that is where I am now. So you can see that I was able to pan on the shade, and in total it took me 8 uses. The next shade that I had left to work on is for J, and that was the shade Jester by Makeup Geek. So it is a single, and this is what the shade looks like now. You can see I was able to pan on this one as well. Before this update I had used it 4 times, and I used it an additional 7 times in the past month for a total of 11 uses, and as you can see I was able to pan on this shade as well. Then obviously with the last shade, as you can see, it is finale, so I was able to pan on this as well. This is the tiniest pan that you will ever see, but it is in the shade Untamed. Right here you can see that there is a tiny pan in the shade, and I did use this an additional 7 times for a total of 19 uses to hit that tiny pan. This was my favorite shade, but I did still enjoy using it. It was just a bit more kind of showed up a bit more black than I wanted to originally, but this palette I only had it for just under a year, but it's already looking super well loved, which I'm happy about. And I think it is a palette I'm going to continue working on because I do enjoy it, and I'm really happy that I finally picked this up before it got discontinued. So like I said, those were all of the eyeshadows that were left in this project at the last update, but I thought I would go through all of the shades that I've been working on as well, just so you can see all the pans in their glory. So we're going to start with the shade for A, and A came from my Amrezy palette by Anastasia, and I was working on the shade Anastasia, which is this one right down here. So that is the first pan. For B, we were working on a shade from my Modern Renaissance palette, and I was working on the shade Buon Fresco, which is this shade right here. So that is the second pan for B. C, like I said, came from my Sultry palette for the shade Cyborg. I just showed you that one, but there it is again. For D, we had a shade from my Norvina palette, again from Anastasia. I tried to focus a lot on these palettes because they are a little bit easier to pan on, but I was working on the shade Dreamer right here, and I did hit pan on this one. For E, we were working on another shade in my Subculture palette, and that was the shade Electric down here, and as you can see it's quite a large pan. I really enjoy this shade, but there is the pan. For F, we have a shade that comes from a palette that got a lot of love in this project, and that is my Magic Mini palette by Juvia's Place. That was the shade Faso, which is this one right here. It's a beautiful purple, and I really enjoyed wearing this shade. For G, we had the shade Ginger down here. You can see that they hit pan on this one as well. It was a beautiful shade, but it was very pigmented. It took me longer than I thought I would to pan on. For H, we had the shade HWY down here from my Mar palette. My Mar palette is a combination of my Mar and my Soul, and I think this is actually a shade called Floaties from the Soul palette, but I do keep it in that spot, and that's why it came in for H. For I, we had another shade from one of my Colourpop 9 palettes, and that was the shade Iffy from my Lilac palette. I absolutely adore this shade. It didn't take me too long to pan on because it is quite a crumbly shade, but the actual color of it is absolutely stunning. And then again for J, we had the shade Jester from Makeup Geek. For K, we had a shade from my Tri palette, and I absolutely adore this shade. It's the shade Koro. It's a beautiful kind of iridescent shade right there, and it was beautiful to wear both on my eyes and as a face highlighter. For L, we had a shade from my Norvina palette again, and that was the shade Love, which is a beautiful pink matte. I feel like I don't have too many of these pinks in my collection, but I really enjoyed wearing this shade. For M, we had a shade from my Soft Glam palette, and that is the shade Mulberry. And in this shade I hit a weird kind of 2 pan, as you can see. And I actually haven't used it since I pan on it, so I still have those 2 tiny pans in it, but it still counts as pan, so this one rolled out. For N, we had another shade from my Subculture palette. This is another palette that I've worked on a lot in this project, and that was the shade New Wave, which was this beautiful kind of creamsicle kind of yellowy orange shade that I really enjoyed wearing, especially in summer. For O, we had a shade that worked really well with that last shade New Wave, and that was the shade Orange Soda from the Soft Glam palette again. You can see the pan right there. It was a beautiful translucent shade, especially when I wore that New Wave shade from Subculture. From the Prism palette, we have the shade for P, which is the shade Pyramid, and this was this gold shade right here. It was a beautiful, stunning shade, and it was really easy to incorporate. I think this is another one that I hit pan on quite early in the year because it was just an easy gold to reach for on an everyday basis. For Q, we had a shade from my Aha Honey palette by Colourpop, and that was the shade Queen Bee, which is this, again, kind of goldy shade, but it's more of a bronze, and it was this shade here. Again, I hit pan on this quite early on because it was easy to incorporate into everyday looks. For R, we had another shade from Modern Renaissance, and that was the shade Raw Sienna down in this corner here. And as you can see, I hit pan on this shade again. It was a beautiful shade to reach for as an everyday transition shade, and I actually really fell in love with the shade working on it in this project. For S, we had a shade from my Jackie palette again, and I really enjoyed this shade. It did take me most of the years to hit pan on this shade, but I loved it when I did use it, and that is the shade Sponsored right here. We're moving away from my Anastasia palettes a bit, and the next shade comes from another Juvia's Place palette, and that is the Deuce. And I was working on the shade Tart in here, which is this top shade here, and it is more of an iridescent shade again that I used both on my inner corners as well as the face highlights. For you, we had a shade from my Anastasia Subculture palette again, and that was the shade Untamed, which I just showed you, which was this shade here. We're almost getting there, guys, but for V, we had a shade from my Nikki Tutorials and Beauty Pay palette, and that was the shade of Love, which was this pastel yellow right here. This one really didn't take me long to pan on because the pans are very shallow, and this was a very powdery shade as well. For W, we had the shade Wild Child from my Norvina palette, which is another pink shade, but this one is a shimmer, and you can see it up there. X was the only shade I didn't find a shade starting with X, so I picked one of my NYX singles in the shade Volatile. I actually have decluttered this from my collection now, but I still have it in my drawer to see if anyone of my friends wants it. So that is what the shade looks like, as you can see, but yeah, it is now decluttered from my collection. And then the last two shades again came from my Magic Mini palette, and that was the shade Gemoya down here, as you can see, which is silver, and Suba, which is this pink up there. So those were the last two shades that I was working on in this project, and you got to see all of the pans right there. But that means that I also am wrapping up this project, and I really hope you have enjoyed this. I absolutely love doing this project, and I might debate doing it again next year. We'll see. I'm kind of rethinking what I want to do in my eyeshadow panning next year, but we'll see if this makes a comeback. But I have really enjoyed being part of this project and kind of, I think, starting it a little bit. But as I mentioned in the introduction, this was obviously inspired by Jessica Lee and Amanda here on YouTube and the Pantastic Ladies, but because they did the H2C project pan, and this is just a version where you only try to hit pan on shades. So this is basically the eyeshadow edition. But that is it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please go ahead and give that a thumbs up, and otherwise I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys.